Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube, where we go behind the headlines to find out more about a story and why it matters. Today, we're going to be discussing President Trump's multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the BBC. It's over the way a documentary edited a speech he made before the riots at the US Capitol on the 6th of January 2021. The BBC has apologised, but says there's no basis for a defamation claim. Let's speak now to our correspondent in Washington, Nomia Iqbal, and our UK political correspondent, Rob Watson. Nomia, firstly, we're talking about a huge amount of money here. What is Donald Trump alleging the BBC has done?
Well, in the lawsuit, he is basically accusing the BBC of, to quote the lawsuit, intentionally, maliciously and deceptively doctoring his speech on January the 6th outside the Capitol. So this lawsuit, which was filed in federal court in Miami, basically complains that the BBC, in the words of President Trump, maliciously strung together two comments that he made more than 54 minutes apart in order to convey the impression that he'd urged his supporters to engage in violence as those electoral votes were being counted to certify President Biden's election victory. Now, just looking at the lawsuit, I'm just going to quote you what it says. It says, it would have been impossible for BBC's journalists and producers to splice together two distinct parts of the speech from nearly 55 minutes apart unless they were acting intentionally. It goes on to say, such a dramatic distortion could never have occurred by accident. So basically, President Trump is accusing the BBC of defaming him.
And he's filed this case in Florida, and a judge there is going to decide the next steps. Why would he have taken the decision to file the case there?
Well, I think the main reason is probably because the UK's 1-year statute of limitations for defamation has passed, whereas Florida offers a 2-year window. So basically, there's more time for them to compile the case. What's also interesting is that in the lawsuit, Donald Trump's lawyers contend that the BBC shot many of the scenes for that Panorama documentary in Florida, and that's around Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach. It's where he lives. It's where he goes home over the weekends. The complaint also makes a point of saying that the BBC has an office, which we do, in Coral Gables, that's just south of Miami. So I think it's probably all those reasons why they have decided to file it in Florida.
And Rob, what's been the BBC's response to this?
So, Charlotte, the BBC says it will defend the case. Now, that implies that it will see President Trump in court. But it strikes me, Charlotte, it also doesn't rule out the possibility of there being some kind of settlement between the two legal teams. But while we're on the case, the BBC does say, whether this goes to court or not, that it doesn't think there is a case to answer. It has 4 defences. Number one, that it says the programme couldn't be legally seen in the United States. Secondly, that there was no intent of malice, as the Trump team has suggested. Third, that it obviously didn't damage President Trump's reputation. It wasn't. It didn't damage him because, after all, he was re-elected. And then the fourth one is just that the cover of freedom of speech, which, of course, freedom of speech laws are even more generous in the United States than they are here in the UK.
I mean, whether the BBC wins or loses, this could still be really damaging for the corporation, couldn't it?
Well, it would certainly be worrying potentially in terms of money because, again, whether it goes to court or not, if you go to court and win, it would obviously cost a lot of money to the BBC to hire a legal team in the United States. I mean, clearly, if you lost, there would be legal costs to pay. And even if you were to settle out of court, that would imply some sort of transfer of funds. And again, the problem the BBC faces is that whether it goes to court or not, President Trump is not popular at all in the United Kingdom. And the idea that the BBC would have to pay over some of the money that the people who watch the BBC or listen to the BBC or read the BBC in the UK and who pay $233 a year for it, that you'd have to pay some money over to President Trump, my goodness, that would be politically unpalatable for the BBC, although clearly some money is going to have to be spent somewhere.
It's never a good time for this kind of thing, but it couldn't really have come at a worse time for the BBC, given that it's about to negotiate its charter with the British government.
The timing is absolutely not ideal, that's for sure, because one of the things that will be reviewed is how the BBC is paid for. And interestingly, the government is suggesting that the BBC should have more funds. It should be able to compete with the big boys like Netflix and Amazon Prime and all those others. So obviously, if the BBC is going to have to pay some money over to someone like President Trump that BBC viewers, audiences have handed over, that would not be popular. But it's not all bad news, because rather interestingly, the majority of politicians in the UK who've spoken out on this, Charlotte, have spoken in defence of the BBC and said, look, the BBC has apologised for the edit, but it absolutely should stand up for itself in court in the United States if it comes to that it should stand up to President Trump, and that Downing Street, the Prime Minister, should back the BBC. And indeed, there have been suggestions that Sir Keir Starmer should call President Trump and say, we're mates, call it off. We don't want you suing the BBC because it's going to make lots of people in Britain very unhappy and poorer.
That would be a very Love Actually moment if that happened. Nomia, this won't obviously just impact the BBC here. It could impact how other media organisations in America deal with President Trump.
Maybe. I think what I would say about that is that President Trump doesn't love the media. I mean, well, he has a love-hate relationship with the media, I'd say. So he does this sort of thing. It's not unexpected. I mean, the list of media organisations that he's gone after is pretty long. There's been various outcomes. I mean, just to give you an example, he sued CBS, which is our partner station, last year. And this was over an interview that CBS did with his then rival, the presidential candidate Kamala Harris. And he basically said that the interview was deceptively edited in such a way that it tipped the scales in favour of the Democratic Party. Now, Paramount, which owns CBS, the parent company, did settle for about $16 million, but they didn't express an apology. And there's other examples. The CNN he went after in 2022, ABC News in 2024, and he did reach multi-million-dollar settlements with various outlets. And again, it was over false reporting, deceptive editing. He's got pending lawsuits, I should add, against the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump likes to sue. It's something he did even before he became president. I'm sure you can trace it right back to the late 70s. There's this sort of legendary tale that he went after this late journalist called Wayne Barrett, who worked for the Village Voice. You'll have to search that online. But the point is that Donald Trump is doing something that is not shocking. It's not unexpected. The BBC is just the latest. And in terms of how it will affect us, well, I mean, I can tell you when we go into the Oval Office, when we go into the cabinet meetings, when we're there as the press pool, when he's giving press briefings, as a journalist, you're always sort of like, you're on your toes with President Trump. You know that you can't just ask him a question and he's not going to hit back at you or try and, throw you off course in some ways. He has this sort of love-hate relationship with the press. So I don't think that this particular lawsuit against the BBC is going to change a huge amount in terms of the environment that the media operate here in the US with Donald Trump. As I said, he has this long history of suing people, media organisations. I think what has happened is that now he's president, the leverage he has over the media has increased exponentially.
Nomia, thank you. And thanks to you as well, Rob. That was Nomia Iqbal and Rob Watson. And you can hear more on this story on the Global News podcast. You can listen wherever you find your podcasts. And if you liked this, please subscribe to us here on YouTube. And also, if there are any stories that you want us to cover, please reply in the comments below. Thank you.